Hey everyone, Jason, you ready for me to go?
Yes, sir, you are a go.
Thank you. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate everyone taking their time, especially in this hectic environment that we're all dealing with, to listen in for a few minutes. I think we've got some really exciting kind of best practices and takeaways on the revenue and distribution side of things for hoteliers. And I'm hoping that our esteemed panelists really bring some out of the box thinking for you guys to sort of take away and implement in your own properties. I know it's a super challenging time, especially for revenue departments across the industry. Trying to get whatever demand that we can as travelers return through the doors. But it's important that we step back and learn about and remember all the distribution practices, best practices, and strategies that we've implemented over the last decade, specifically with channel mix and making sure that we're getting the right demand that goes to the bottom line, and not just taking any demand that we can at discounted rates. So that's what we dove into when we wrote the report, a fresh start, a clean start to hotel distribution post COVID-19. And that's what we're going to break down for you today. We're going to look at the report and break down some of the things that we talked about in it. And then also catch up on what's going on since the report was released. Demand is changing every day in such a dynamic environment. So I'm excited to hear from our participants what's going on at their hotels. So with that said, thanks again to our panelists for joining us. I am going to let them introduce themselves briefly and talk about what's going on in their role today and at their properties. So I will start with Johnathan Capps. I think he's first on the screen, or at least on mine. So Johnathan is VP of Revenue at Charlestown Hotels. Johnathan, thanks for joining us, and give us a little catch up on what's going on at Charlestown.
Yeah, I appreciate the time. So we're a third-party operator that operates 50 hotels, mainly independents, average around 100 keys, and then 7 brands sprinkled in there. But we're throughout the country. We go north to Newport, south to Fort Lauderdale, and west to Santa Clara. So, kind of our status, everything's open. That all trickled in kind of based on reopening of states and guidelines. I think for our size, it benefited us because we can open very skeleton crew. We kept general managers and key staff on even for security purposes. And when stuff was ready to open, we were ready. We spent a lot of time on our preparations, our equipment, and our procedures, and just had that ready to go when staff comes back on, and staff is still coming back on. I think there's markets that got well ahead and got open, and there's some stuff that just opened. I think, the case for us is now what's kind of dropping backwards a little bit as numbers spike. We're seeing cancellations equal to reservations, kind of in a 1-for-1, which has kind of been a tick back. And then, kind of taking the outlook of what the fall looks like, we're in some university markets, what that's going to look like, what staffing is going to look like as, people with kids and schools come back. And then as, the actual pandemic rolls through, any staffing impacts directly. Again, I feel really good that, we have a lot of plans in place to deal with staffing, guests, contact tracing, et cetera. But with everything, I think in the revenue world and the operations world, you don't know until such a short notice in this time. And while we'd like to be proactive, there's a lot of responsiveness that's happening. You just hope that you have everything backed up to prepare for that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And then what about your role? What's your day-to-day look like these days? I'm sure it's a lot different than it was 3 months ago or 6 months ago.
Yeah, so a little bit for us. I mean, I'm based in Charleston, South Carolina. So, South Carolina's kind of in that bubble with Florida, Texas and some other states that, are kind of in those hot spots. And yeah, I mean, it's managing a team virtually. It's setting up things a little differently. I think for our properties, the good for us is, we're not based where our properties are, right? So we were always set up to support them remotely. We always communicate different, via video mediums and chats, et cetera. It's more the management of my team, right? And I think, while us as a company, we had remote work days and, things like that, you really want to make sure, one, you're supporting your team as much as possible. I have a team of 7 revenue managers that, are supporting our 50 properties, but also, is that a productive for them? Do they need different tools, different resources? It goes all the way down to, in our office, everyone has 2 monitors and a setup and, their kind of space, and what do you need to provide them at home? And then is that, there's a percentage of people that just won't be productive in that environment. They just need whether it's collaboration or accountability they feel in the office, they need that. So, you try to work through that and just assess and support as we go week to week.
Yeah, that's awesome, Johnathan. I love that insight. I'm so curious as to how things are going at the property level. Linda, I'm interested if you can kind of just follow up on that. What do your teams look like today? Do you have people at the properties, or are they working from home? And, what kind of challenges and opportunities is that presenting for your team?
Yeah, I mean, I have most of my team is working remote since all of our hotels at one point were closed.
Sorry, just to interrupt, I forgot. Linda Gulrajani, I believe I'm saying that right, VP of Revenue Strategy and Distribution at Marcus Hotels and Resorts. Linda, tell us a little bit about Marcus. How many properties do you guys have and where are you located?
So we have 19 hotels. We own half of them, manage half of them, mix of independent and branded hotels, kind of spread throughout the country. So yeah, I mean, just, kind of to talk a little bit similar to what Johnathan's experiencing, we have most of our hotels open. We still have 6 though that are closed. Those are primarily urban downtown locations and markets where there just is not a ton of demand and there's a lot of inventory. We're seeing our demand for our resort hotels go through the roof right now. Really to the point that we're having a hard time keeping up with staffing and operations and keeping the guests happy because our mix of business is so different than it historically is, with a lot less group than we typically have in the past. It's just different to have a full house of transient guests. We're seeing most of our business coming through retail channels. It's been really encouraging that we haven't seen a huge spike in OTA business. That business for us has been relatively flat year over year. So it's nice to see that the industry is not, immediately going to those channels like in the past. Same with pricing, although I think there's a new normal for pricing, right? Because there's no demand generators or group business in the market. Pricing's, I think remaining pretty stable. And especially at our resort hotel, we're actually able to drive some really, really good rates, actually better than last year at those resorts. So that's encouraging. Back to my team though, most of them are remote. Like Johnathan said, I spend a lot of time talking to my team, making sure that they understand what's happening in the organization, trying to be transparent with them, making sure that I understand the nuances that are happening in each hotel in each market, because every market is very, very different. I mean, so we have like a hotel in Oklahoma City, and that hotel is just doing phenomenal. We have a hotel in Madison, Wisconsin that's doing okay, right? So every market is performing very, very differently right now. The other thing that I'm seeing and spending a lot of time on is how do I take the granular information that my team is feeding up to me market by market and hotel by hotel and feeding that up to our leadership team and our owners, because for the first time ever, I've seen the owners looking for a level of granularity that we've just never experienced before. So they're looking at daily pickup for the hotels by day. They're looking at what channels we're getting bookings through, what segments. And, some of our legacy systems aren't built to easily communicate that. So we're having to find new ways to be able to make that data visible to them in ways that they can understand and that's meaningful.
Yeah.
And frankly, trying to balance the positive data with the negative data, right? Because it's real easy right now for everybody to go down, the doom and gloom path.
Yeah, that's super helpful, Linda. I we'll dive into each of those topics more, I think, throughout this conversation, especially the idea of owners wanting to see more and, how we can do that, some best practices around. I'd love to hear how you guys are sharing some of that information. I know that, systems, a lot of times the systems aren't quite there yet. and there's workarounds. Hopefully the systems are getting there where, we're able to export the data and share them between the systems and get them into a BI tool that's, easily usable for everybody. I think that's where we're all trying to get to. On that note, Nicole, I'll ask you, just to kind of follow up on Linda, is that what your clients, so Linda, Nicole is Corporate Director of Revenue Management at SHR. I think, Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, she helps run their outsourcing, so their services department where they help hotels with revenue management outsourcing. Nicole, is that kind of what you're seeing your clients are dealing with today as well?
Yeah, very similar to what Johnathan and Linda had mentioned. Our clients, we run the gamut mostly here in the United States, but we have some international, tiny boutiques, some island-based properties. So we really see it all with our client mix. We have some that are still shut down because no one can travel to the island they're on. And then we have some, like Linda mentioned, that are more resort, drive market resort type properties that are just doing really, really well. The interesting thing right now is just everything is changing again, right? With some of these hotspots and closures that are starting to come back in place. So now having to reverse some of that positive growth and start trying to, address that again as it's cropping up and how we can best position for that, and hopefully have learned some lessons from the first time. So the other thing that we're working on our side, and the other half of my position, I work with our Wave revenue management system. And what we're really working with our clients on that side on is addressing their struggles really in forecasting right now. Historicals are irrelevant and demand is changing so fast. And the pickup is coming very short term, very fast. In very different sources and segments than people may be used to. So really, working from a technology and a system standpoint to help our client properties with their forecasting and with their price positioning. Yeah,
so Nicole and Linda, you guys both touched on forecasting and, owners wanting to see the forecast, in real time, if at all possible. How are you guys, you guys work together, right? How are you guys working together to provide that information? What's the forecast accuracy looking like these days, Nicole? And how are you, Linda, how are you able to digest that and, make decisions based on that and feed that to ownership? And I'm not leaving you out, Andrew. We'll get to you, promise. I just wanted to touch on this one briefly before we moved on.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm. I might let Linda take that one to speak to ownership first. I know that's a big piece of it and something I'm sure they're doing quite a bit.
Yeah, Linda, just give it to me straight. How's the forecasting looking these days? Is it, I keep hearing from a lot of people that it's really challenging and that you've got to be doing it, in real time, and you've got to be looking at more forward-looking data than historical data, like Nicole said. What challenges are you running into there? And then how are you making decisions based on that?
Well, we historically use Profit Sword to do our forecasting, but what we found is we've actually started using more of a Google Doc and just doing the next 2 months, and it's just more accessible to our team and to our owners to be able to share that information. And we're really layering in both a forecast, transient group contract compared to what's on the books, and I'm having my team update it every single day. To make sure that we've got the most up-to-date information in there. Our company, we did basically a model that looked at what would it look like if we ran a 20% occupancy, a 40% occupancy, and a 60% occupancy, and laid out our labor just so that we could look at what our staffing models would look like. And then that went into our opening plan that our owners basically vetted through and decided when we were going to open hotels and which of those 3 models that we would deploy. The good thing for us is actually pretty much all of our hotels have done better than the forecast that we put in that opening model. So, I think we took a really conservative approach, just not knowing what each market was going to look like based on the little data that we had. And so again, it's just continually updating it in a way that's easy to share to your owners and not even your owners, just your owners, but your senior leadership team as well.
Yeah, Johnathan, are you seeing kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I was even thinking, we're taking a similar method, right? It's you kind of take some paths and pick some paths as far as scenarios, and almost in the budget scenario, right? It's you're outlining major assumptions. You're not really taking it, that group by that group. You're going to take an assumption that it's a 75, maybe 100% wash on, events, et cetera. And then, it's in that best case, and to Linda's point, middle case, and we haven't liked to give a best case either. And I think a lot of the points is that, us realizing, and to Linda's point is that, you're when we're fully running and stuff's open, you're talking about changing people's hours, right? Well, the scenarios we're running now, we're talking about, actually re-employing people and bringing people back. So there's major decisions to be made. And I think even to Linda's point, some of it, thankfully, the performance has been better, but, you weren't ready to bring people back, or people, weren't out there to come back necessarily. So even on the higher performing side, there's been some operational challenges. And then, everything with ownership is, you're trying to get that forecast as accurate as possible for cash flow reasons, right? It may be that tight up against it where they need to know whether they're going to have to fund stuff in 30 days or 90 days. And that's obviously different pictures. And that communication with us is just happening so much more frequently with ownership, and rightfully so on their side, right? It's a check that they're having to write.
Yeah, is it almost like, we've been talking for a decade now about bridging sales and revenue and marketing and, breaking down those walls. And is it almost like COVID has kind of forced us to do this, right? I mean, like we've been getting there slowly but surely, but now I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but it sounds like there's a lot more communication going on between all the departments just because we have to.
Yeah, I would agree.
Awesome. So, hey, Andrew, I'm going to introduce you, and then I want to get to one of the topics that one of these panelists mentioned that I think is right up your alley. So we talked about, Andrew Warner is the CMO of Digital Hotelier. They help, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but you help hoteliers kind of figure out their technology solutions, which ones work with one another, and get them implemented and up and running. The hoteliers talked about the challenges of sharing the data from one system to another and getting it in front of the right eyes easily. What are you seeing there? Is that something that kind of hit home to you?
Yeah, so Digital Hotelier, just to summarize what we do. So I'm the Chief Marketing Officer. So essentially we work with hotels all over the world, literally all over the world, every continent. So it's been really interesting to see the different challenges that different hotels have had at different points in time through this crisis, and the different ways in which we've been having to help them. So we do outsource marketing for a lot of these hotels. We advise and consult them. And yes, we also do technology solutions as well. So, to your point, I think it's been quite interesting. A lot of the hotels that we found which have been shut, and I would say some of the more progressive ones perhaps, have been using that time, I think, to take a little bit of almost like a sort of step back and see what technology is working, not working for them, and really starting to rethink their approach to that and their stack. What we've seen is quite a few people looking at their internet booking engines, looking at integration between systems, and even looking at solutions where they're kind of bringing together data from different sources and producing more integrated reports. And that's also been driven by, I think, a couple of the panelists have made the point that we're working with partners who have less staff than they would normally have. And that's kind of forced teamwork, and we've seen that a lot. So we haven't always had the usual faces in the meetings. And sometimes people have been stretching in their roles. So someone who normally maybe just looking at revenue management or looking at marketing is now looking at more things than perhaps they normally would, because those teams have got people on furlough. They're not there anymore. And similarly, we also see smaller groups of people going, hey, how do we get out of this situation? How do we not make some of the mistakes that we make in the past? So certainly a meta search, for example, is an area where we've seen, and Google generally actually, people looking at how they can better integrate between their systems and what they're seeing in terms of demand generation. So, for example, there's a tool which is called Hotelier AI, which we work with, which we've had a lot of customers being very interested in how we pull in data from their systems into that, and also data from the market in terms of what we're seeing from a Google perspective, And from an advertising perspective, in terms of both the rates and on the hotel rates, and also the prices of advertising, what's working, what's not working, and putting that all together to help them to make better decisions. And these are things where perhaps, I mean, hospitality is a fairly conservative category, generally speaking. Having worked with a few, it's relatively conservative. There's so many people now, I think, taking a step back and saying, perhaps this is an opportunity to reset. So looking at their revenue mix, looking at their marketing, we've had more people talk to us than ever before about their direct demand. What can we do here to maybe be less reliant on OTAs moving forward? Or how can we really take advantage of some of these new things that Google are offering? And from a technology point of view as well. And it's almost like, and I think, you know, in the report there was a reference to soft brands. Almost some people are kind of looking as well at whether there is an alternative to a soft brand, which is using technology to achieve many of the same objectives, but without the sort of commitment that you have of going into a more longer term relationship, if you like, with a third party. So it's really incredibly volatile, a lot of questions, a lot of firefighting, a lot of thinking. I mean, it's been real thinking time lately, but a ton of people really thinking about what can we do differently coming out of this. And it's not necessarily because of COVID, it's almost because COVID has presented an opportunity and some breathing space, people to ask the questions that perhaps day to day they wouldn't normally be asking themselves when they're in the sort of red hot of operations.
Yeah, I want to move on. So we're going to dive right into this optimal channel mix thing in a second here, to your point there, Andrew. But I want to quickly, I want to wrap up this data topic before we move on. You know, you mentioned something about, you know, the systems ingesting all the different data and market data and more data out there available. Nicole, I know you guys have taken a hard look at the data that your systems ingest and the data that you're making decisions on. And I know you're looking at, I mean, someone mentioned to me that you're looking at COVID data by market and making decisions based on that. What was the impetus to look at additional data sets, and what are you guys trying to pull in now?
Well, I mean, one of the main reasons for looking at additional data sets is just because, again, everything's changed, and the data that you may have used to or be used to looking at for your hotel is not that relevant anymore. I think a lot of people were very, very reliant on historicals because that was kind of the best predictor of behavior when the market had been fairly stable for so long and just kind of steady growth. Our system, we have looked at how we can use both COVID data or also the ability to just kind of specify stages of recovery for your particular hotel, particular market, but with the idea that, again, because you can't forecast based on historicals right now, but so in the immediate near term, you need to really be focused on very short-term pickup trends, kind of maybe a moving average type thing. But when you do start to want to forecast 4, 5, 6 months out, assuming that you have kind of you're in a different place of recovery, you also need to shift away from that. So it's almost, you need to forecast differently short term than you do for the medium term and for the long term. And for that reason, we've really, sat down and looked at how we look at data and what data we're looking at, so we can make those changes and really be able to much more flexibly and dynamically forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Cool. So I want to ask everybody this question. So the impetus of the report in putting together a fresh start to distribution was, listen, we've been talking about this optimal channel mix for 10 years, right? Or more. And we've made a lot of strides as an industry in our ability to look at, which channel drives the best demand for our hotels. And, not that one doesn't fill in the other. We use OTAs to fill in our niche periods, and and they're great at that. They're great at filling in shoulder dates and things of that nature. But we've been focusing a lot on driving traffic direct. So it was hey, let's stop now that that we've got almost zero demand, or less than 10% occupancy at a lot of our hotels. As we start to build new demand, and travelers start returning, and our demand grows, are we going to remember those best practices, or are we just going to take any available demand? And honestly, in having these conversations, it was a tough question to ask, because a lot of us who aren't operating a hotel on a day-to-day basis, it's tough for us to say, no, you shouldn't just take whatever demand comes through the doors, right? And because you know, in some cases, that's what people had to do to stay open and to keep people employed. So, you know, it's a pretty honest question and a pretty frank question, but I'd like to go around the room, and I'm guessing the hoteliers will have a little bit a different answer than some of the service providers on the call. But so I'd like to start with the hoteliers. Johnathan, is it too much to ask for us to say, hey, you know, take a look at the demand that you're bringing in and make sure that it is the most profitable demand?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you can look at both ways, right? You talk about acquisition costs a little bit, but then you talk about channel mix. And kind of one thing when we, you know, saw this, and even during the closure conversations that were happening was when stuff reopens, right? We all knew what was taking the hit right away and what was happening in the group markets and what was happening with corporate. I mean, you can go through your corporate list and see corporations that were stopping travel through the end of the year or however long. So you kind of can look at it, you know, it was going to be that leisure mix, and it may have been some one-off BT stuff that you were like, okay, it will be the first to pick back up. And if you take some of these resort markets, you know, Wisconsin, South Carolina beaches, you know, we knew what was coming in there. We knew the level of, we couldn't gauge exactly what that demand was going to be exactly, but we knew it was going to come from the leisure market. So, you know, kind of my message to my team was, the OTAs aren't going to have any different access to that, right? We're still in the positioning that we were as an open hotel. We're still marketing. Now, we've cut spend back, as, you know, as we've seen, probably have they, right? You got to be in those same bubbles that they're not getting the influx of business to spend in reverse as well. So, you know, kind of had to say, and not to take the aggressive approach, could you go the other way and be like, all right, well, if 40, 60% is your cap, or you knew that there was going to cap out, what would this show you in that, right? And I think with us, and especially in these leisure markets and our independent hotels, is if anything, that number is stayed flat or shrunk a little bit. You know, we talked a little bit before, you know, we've seen call volume pick up a little bit, and it's people wanting to check our procedures. So I think if anything with distribution and channel with us, it's making sure our messages were updated and what we wanted to say about the hotel, and even judging the competitive positioning of our hotel versus other on those sites. But no, I think hopefully, and I've seen some of that in markets where people have pulled true. You know, as I tell my team, I think, you know, we talked about soft brands and OTAs. I think they see an opportunity, right? You find the right person in a desperate situation and give them the right message of, man, we're seeing numbers coming into your market that, you know, we could just produce so much more for you. And that mindset is like, oh, well, I just had a call with an owner 45 minutes ago and they were just pressing me for more business, right? But if you truly step back and say, we are getting the business that we should be getting, there's not 75% available in the market, and we do have an opportunity to tighten this up via rate, via distribution, then it should be looked at the same, right? I mean, obviously we're in a different situation than ever before, but this is a down environment, right? This is an off season, a shoulder for some, right? So it can be viewed more that way than like, all right, well, we got to change our dependency and our distribution because, you know, we didn't have it. I'd say there's niche cases where if you're a heavy group house or you're a hotel that never took OTAs before, sure, then your distribution strategy may drastically change in this environment. But coming out of group, you can still see data out there that is going to tell you that there's only 40% of occupancy available in the market, or there's only 50%. So it's not that you're going to come out, change your distribution, and still outperform those hotels.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you're saying is looking at the market and evaluating where you sit in the market and making sure you sit in the place where you want to sit and where the place where you sat before and possibly even better. Linda, is that the approach you guys are taking at Marcus as well, similar?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly done the work on the cost of acquisition and understand by channel what's most profitable. But, you know, in most of our markets right now, we'll take anything, right? I mean, we're running 20, 30% occupancies. So, you know, I don't think we're at a point to, you know, make a strong decision on saying I'm not going to take business from one channel or another. But it doesn't mean we can't be smart, right? So we fought to make sure we had marketing dollars in our budget, you know, not what we had before, but that we had marketing dollars to focus on the channels that are the most profitable for us. and that we're not making bad decisions by, dropping our rates on the OTAs or being out of parity. A lot of our hotels sit at the top of the market, so we're trying really hard to maintain our retail rate position in the markets to help keep the markets healthy, right? Yeah. And as we start to come out of this, will we continue to look at ways to drive to the most profitable channels? Absolutely. Yeah. But, I think to Jonathan's point, it's kind of an interesting point as you think about a lot of our hotels are really group heavy. And as we don't have group in the next 3 or 4 months, we're going to have a lot more inventory. So your mix is going to change, and it might appear that you have more OTA or more discount business. But it's really because you had a lot more inventory, right? I mean, historically, hotels are running 80, 90% during these months. So it's different, right? And so we also have to be careful how we look at the data after the fact and critique it, because it's way different than it was last year at the same time.
Well, you guys
I was going to say, if I could add to that, it's funny she acknowledges that. I think great on Linda, right? And Linda and I've crossed a few times and, had these conversations, but there is a pressure. There's an added pressure to that rate leader in that market, right? And it's great when someone can acknowledge like their property is the leader, because we see that in a lot of secondary and tertiary markets, right? And seasonal, like everyone's looking at the top, that gives you the barometer of maybe a little bit of what the ceiling is. And, it's usually the bigger added pressure of that one property that can push down a market. And hopefully for Linda and what I've seen is that, a lot of those market leaders in that sense have, kind of held their position. And a lot of what we're doing is in a 45, 60-day window. So it gives us a little bit to kind of keep integrity long-term, but it's nice to hear that and see, because we are seeing that in a lot of places. And I think it's kind of keeping things a little bit steady and at bay, and, maybe not causing too much chaos in the pricing world as of yet.
So I was going to say, both of you guys are pros at, collecting the data and analyzing it and looking at it to make decisions. I know there are a lot of people out there in the industry that aren't maybe quite to the level that you guys are. So I wonder if we can just dive quickly into the logistics of how you guys do that, Johnathan and Linda. So you're talking, Linda, you're talking about, making sure that you're looking at the data, but I know there are people out there that are just getting started and they're like, I don't even know, what data to look at and where to start. So can you share, peel back the curtain a little bit and share like what are you using to measure the data? How often does it come up? I mean, are you talking with your team about it on a daily basis, or do you bring it to the weekly revenue meetings, and, how do you kind of show it and share it?
So I think you're overestimating our company's, I guess, ability to collect the data. So on the group in banquet and catering side, we do have a BI system that we use to collect and report on our data. But on the transient side, because we're a mix of different brands, independents who are using different systems, it's clunky and it's very manual. So my team literally once a week is updating a Google Doc with data such as transient pace, group pace, what was booked in the last 7 days for future dates compared to what we booked last year. So not including any type of cancellation. So we're just really looking at true booking data. And then we're also looking at what our bookings are by channel and by segment, so we can see not only where that business is coming from, but is it changing over time? And then the other thing that my team is great at, and I think it's really important right now, because there is a sense by some people in the hotel industry that if your hotel's closed or if you're running a 20% occupancy, that revenue management doesn't matter, and that if there's no revenue to manage, what are those people doing, right? So, my team has been really, really good at feeding information to both the hotel leadership team as well as me on, what trends are they seeing, or how many bookings are we booking every day for that month, or how many bookings on the weekend are we getting same day, or did we all of a sudden start to see a negotiated account start to book, or did we see a new kind of random group pop in? So just communicating those little things, I think, is really helpful, and then sharing it across our portfolio as well. And same with the brands, so if something happens at one of the Hilton hotels, we share it across all of the Hilton hotels. So, a lot of it is just the upward communication and trying to find those nuggets of information that are meaningful and, you know, not just give people hope, but it start to see what's happening in each market.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, how about you, Jonathan? You want to weigh in on just sort of the logistics of collecting the data and bringing it to the table?
Yeah, same. I mean, we're in a lot of different markets in a lot of different systems. So some of that's been manual and some stuff we want to look at, you know, whether it's been both bookings and kind of net reservations, depending on, you know, where we want to compare what cancellation data, you know, in these short time periods. I think Linda hit on two things that I'll carry further is one, yeah, you're trying to find, you know, in a normal environment, you're like, when is there going to be a concert at Red Rocks, and when is this going to be announced, or what are the football seasons? And now we're looking like, you know, that revenue management still needed, and it's much smaller and niche, right? It's like, when are students going to come pick up their stuff from the dorms, and is that an opportunity for an influx of business? Or in another market, you know, there's an evacuation, or to Linda's point, a small corporate piece of business that's sliding in. So yeah, I mean, the revenue management important to kind of look at not just the data points, but the activity, right? You're going back to some older school tactics that's reservations made, you know, the front desk asking questions of why people are coming into town. And the other for me is just pricing data, right? Everyone always takes a snapshot in the day for the day, but I'm a big fan of pricing history and really saying you're understanding how someone's moved price in 7 to 14 days. So you're not reacting to a price of where you're at for a future date and where they're at, but where they've moved and where you've moved to understand that. I like that a lot to go along with that demand data.
Yeah. Hey, Andrew and Nicole, it really pains me to hear these hoteliers say they're building spreadsheets and Google Docs to keep track of their data. What can we do to fix that here? I mean, listen, I know not one company's got all the answers here, and it's a fragmented industry, and it requires a lot of pieces and moving parts and a lot of two-way integrations, but we got to do something about this. Andrew, where can we start?
Well, you know, it's tough to start trying to preach to hoteliers who are trying to stay open at the moment. They should be spending on new systems and spending, you know, a lot of man hours on it. But at the same time, I think what we've seen is that, and just picking up on a couple of points. Firstly, the temptation is sometimes to, it doesn't sound like these two guys are doing this, but a lot of hoteliers we speak to just basically go, you know, this is all really complex. Expedia knows how to do all this, Booking.com knows how to do all this. I'm just going to kind of subcontract this almost, and I can't keep track of all these spreadsheets and things. So it's just too hard. I'm not going to bother taking control of things. I'm going to really let the OTAs almost do it all for me. And I used to work for one of those big OTAs, and they're good at what they do, but also they're never an organisation that tends to not take advantage of a good crisis if a good crisis arises for their longer term business, right? So there are a lot of OTAs going out there doing exactly what Jonathan was saying, going around saying, hey, there's tons of demand out there, and actually you should be just letting us generate it for you. Just give us all the inventory. Don't worry about parity too much. Give us all these deals. Sign all this stuff away. We'll give you some free advertising on the side, all that kind of stuff, which eventually they can't sell anyway, right? So I would say take ownership. I mean, and the better hotels that we're seeing are the ones who were taking ownership before the crisis happened. Because there's more people looking at your own hotel website than ever before. Because it's your own hotel website where they're going to find out whether it's open or not, what the procedures are, what the safety measures are, all the kind of stuff. They're going to go direct to your website. They're not going to find all that on an OTA, rarely. They probably don't trust OTAs, that kind of stuff. So the better hotels are the ones who were in a good shape already, who had good hotel websites, had mobile sorted, or at least a mobile website that worked, and then had back-end systems which pulled stuff together. And I think a lot of hotels who, not a lot, but some hotels who we work with have been in the situation, which again our two hoteliers were talking about, where they had a lot of group business and that fell away, or indeed a lot of OTA business. And one thing which happened was the OTAs stopped advertising because they were hurting too. And OTAs, really, their main benefit is they do the marketing for you. And when then they stopped doing marketing, in a lot of countries, they kind of stopped altogether. All of a sudden, they're just stuck. They haven't got anywhere else to go. So our advice is always to, and particularly if you're closed, to take a look at this situation and think beyond where we are immediately. And from an integration point of view, there's a ton of different partners out there you can work with, including ourselves, and who are moving solutions or working on solutions together in partnerships. So we work with SHR on a bunch of stuff, and we work with others. And we're really looking at how we can integrate things and getting involved in that conversation, doing a bit of research. There are PMS systems now which are cloud-based rather than the old legacy systems, which are easier to integrate with your booking engine, which can be integrated with your marketing suite, if you like. And the more you connect these things together and the more you automate, then the easier that all becomes to work as a piece. And so that's something which we're working with a bunch of people on. But certainly we're not in a position where at the moment we're saying to people, hey, you should be really heavily investing in big ticket items when you're not getting enough people coming through your door at the moment. What we're trying to do is work with people on a case-by-case basis and saying, how can we help? And often that's working with stuff that you've already got. And sometimes it's easier saying, hey, we've got this thing over here. Instead of sticking on a Google sheet, why not plug this into that? And then you can get this piece of data on a dashboard that's easier for you to view and quicker to make decisions about. So we need something easy like data visualization. It's very much case-by-case. But certainly I think it's a wake-up call for a lot of people right now to think about their technology stack. And we would say, don't just subcontract everything out, because I hope that the hotels who have done that have started to see the consequences of that and take ownership. Make sure that you are in control of your own revenue strategy rather than finding out that you weren't, and then you're now in a position where you can't because you just don't have the right data in the right places to make smart decisions.
Yeah, thank you. So Nicole, I'll give you an opportunity to answer the original question. I know we're working towards solving some of those challenges, but I think it's a great transition to also ask. I have an echo. I hope you guys can hear me okay. An opportunity to also ask, what's this going to look like in the future? And we'll sort of end with that. We'll wrap up with, I'd like to go around the room and ask the panelists, all of these things that we're talking about today, what's the ideal state? And, hopefully as COVID passes in the second half of 2020 and we look to 2021, hopefully with a different and stronger outlook, we get back to work on making all these systems work together and taking the best information and analyzing it and making the smartest decisions for our hotel. What's that look like 2 or 3 years from now? And I'll start with you, Nicole.
Okay, I'm actually going to dial back and answer the other question first with regard to the data, because that kind of feeds into that, right? So something we find with both our revenue management clients and then on the Wave side as well is that people are very hesitant they think it's going to be a lot of work or it's a big project when you're talking about integrating new systems and implementing this kind of stuff at your property or at your management company. But people are already spending so much time on these manual worksheets and compiling data, with their teams, that in the long run, it is really valuable to kind of take this time to look at different technology solutions. There's a lot of ways to trial it, work with the vendors and really get a feel for these systems. But the technology is here and it's designed to make your life easier. Andrew mentioned data visualization. That's something that is really, really valuable, because I know as revenue managers, we love a good spreadsheet, right? But when you're talking to a lot of the different personalities and stakeholders involved, that ability to just really quickly load up a visual tool, a chart or graph or something like that, and be able to slice that data is very valuable. And it just makes it really a lot easier to get those insights that you want to communicate on to the rest of the team. So as far as the overarching question of distribution, what all this looks like in a few years, Linda kind of touched on it earlier, which is very much where I see it and my team kind of sees it as well with our clients, is that right now we're distressed, it's distressed inventory, your occupancy is low. We would always recommend maintaining your rate parity. You don't offer extra sales, but it's very important to maximize and to be strategic with all of your channels, right? You want to optimize them all because you have plenty of inventory for most people. And then just like we're approaching forecasting in kind of segmented fashion, it's just going to be really important. People keep asking about how we learned lessons from last time. It's going to be really important for hoteliers to keep in mind, my strategy now is not my strategy 6 months from now, and plan their recovery strategy now so that as they get into those timeframes, they're ready to implement that and they don't let inertia carry them forward and end up not managing their mix properly. So I'm kind of in line with what I think Linda was saying, which is that I don't think there's going to be some seismic shift in business mix as far as on the retail side. I think that what's really going to be impactful over these next few years is how corporate travel changes, and then what potential changes to corporate travel and maybe the larger group stuff that takes a few years, how that then impacts balancing those other segments. But I think between open and direct, those will, I don't think, see seismic changes, but as a whole, that goes together in a much larger shift.
Yeah, sure, Linda, maybe I'll go to you next, just for kind of, a current takeaway from the current state of where we're at, and then, your ideal state of where you guys hope to be when all this passes in terms of distribution.
Well, I mean, current state, we're lean. We're really, really lean right now, both in revenue, sales, and marketing. So, I suspect we'll continue to be lean on the revenue side. I hope we're not too short-sighted on the group and marketing side, because that's our bread and butter, right? We need that business for our hotels to be successful. So, I think we need to continue to focus on those channels and just make good pricing decisions on the transient side. But, we need to think out of the box and be innovative and do things that we have never done before. And, we've got to continue to look at all of the different pieces of data and be able to be nimble and make quick decisions and changes, as we're seeing things happen. So.
Sure. Johnathan, how about you?
Yeah, I think you led off with it, right? It started with a collaboration of departments, and I think some of this is forced, while we felt like we were good in our organization of communication across departments, it's one in which, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. The short term is we're talking a lot more. We're involved in the forecasting. We understand what's impacting operations and how they're modeling their labor and how we're impacting the future. I think for me, in the long-term future is two things: is not really changing distribution, but hoping that our competitive benchmarking gets a little stronger, and we see some changes from what the opportunities are out there to get a picture of a market, and that we continue to grow in the ability of those tools. I mean, everyone mentioned it, right? The BI tools are a little bit more collaborative with our PMS systems, and a lot more things within the industry work together.
Okay, I'm back. Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody's time. I think we can wrap on that. I think that was super informative. And again, I really appreciate you guys stepping in to share some of those best practices. Linda, Johnathan, I wish you guys the best moving forward. Everybody else as well. But you guys have your feet in the hotels and are pulling the levers and making things happen. So our best to you moving forward. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.